Task 16 wants us to go to S12. And what it wants us to use is the Evaluate Formula tool to figure out what's wrong with this function. So we're going to go to the Formula tab here at the top. In the Formula Auditing, we want to click Evaluate Formula. And what it wants us to do is just click Evaluate twice so we can see that these numbers are subtracting, and then you can see here that these numbers are subtracting. But really what it wants us to do is there's an error, and what it is, if you look, there's a huge difference between these two sets of numbers. And what it is it's subtracting these numbers here instead of adding them. That's basically using the Evaluate tool. You should be able to figure out, which can be difficult. You didn't create this table, so looking at one odd end set of numbers can be hard to find. But ultimately, what the Evaluate wants you to see is in this step is that we need to add these numbers together. Task 17 wants us to use the VLOOKUP function on the Employee Records tab. So we'll go to the Employee Records tab. We'll put our cursor in F7, and then we'll go ahead and begin our VLOOKUP. Click OK. Our lookup value is going to be Craig Stronin. Our table array is going to be a 6 to D39. And then we're looking for the ID, which is the C column here. So that's 1, 2, 3. We'll go ahead and select 3. And we'll click OK. Task 18 wants us to go to the status chart tab here, and then it wants us to change the layout of this chart. So what we want to do is, with that selected, we now can go to the Design tab here at the top. We'll click Quick Layout and select 1. And then it wants us to change the chart styles to Style 9 here. So we'll go ahead and click this More to select 9. If you're not sure, hover. It also wants us to change the employment history, so we'll change the chart title to that. We'll click out of that text box. And then what it wants us to do is to save this as a chart template in our GMetrix templates folder. And there are a few ways to do this. I'm just going to go ahead and right-click here and click Save as Template. And then I'll map to my GMetrix templates folder. Type in the name. Task 19 wants us to add a logarithmic trend line to our financial data chart here. So in order to do that, there are a few ways to do this, but with that selected, we'll click this plus here to get the trend line. And we'll click this arrow to get more options. 2005 is our base for this, so we'll click OK. We'll select logarithmic. And then we want to go forward, so we'll go ahead and type in 1.5 here. And then we can close out of that. Notice it went ahead and extended that out. And then it wants us to do another one, an exponential trend line onto the other chart. So we'll click that. We'll click the plus, trend line arrow. Scroll down so we can see more. We can actually just click this here instead of going through all that again. We'll click OK. Task 20 wants us to go ahead and modify the data validation input message here that just says offices. So if you click here on the title here in A4 to G4, you'll get this here. What you want to do is click data at the top, and in the data tools we want to click the data validation drop down to select data validation, and then we want to select the input message here, and in the input message we want to change that to the text below. When you're done, click OK, and notice the change. Task 21 wants us to create two scenarios called wants and wishes, and it wants us to do that by changing this value here, the future income. So what we want to do is go to the data tab here at the top, and in the forecast group we're going to click the what if analysis and click scenario manager, and we're going to click add. And the first one is wants, and it's by changing G22. It's already populated with that because I selected that cell, but that's that right there. We'll click OK. And then the first scenario is 10,000. We'll click OK. And then we want to create a second one called wishes. We'll click OK. And we're going to change that to 15,000. We'll click OK. And then what it wants us to do is to select wants and then click show, and notice it says 10,000 here. Make sure you select wants before you click that. We'll click close. Task 22 wants us to create a new worksheet, and then what we're going to use is the consolidate feature to consolidate this data here. So we'll click the plus button here, and it wants us to change this worksheet to cut cost. We'll hit enter to set our text, and then we'll go on the data tab here at the top, and the data tools, we'll click consolidate sum function here, and then our cursor's in the reference, so we'll go ahead and go to the family budget tab, and then we'll begin selecting our range here. Click add. Once you're done adding those ranges, you want to select top row and left column before you click OK. Task 23 wants us to go ahead and create a pivot table based upon the information found here in this table on the employee records. So go ahead and select the entire table. What we'll do is click insert here at the top, click pivot table. Right here it's just going to verify the range we've already selected. We'll click OK. We'll go ahead and double click the sheet name because we need to change this to pivot table. We'll click enter to set that text. And then down here it tells us what it really wants us to do. So the office column is going to be our filter. So we'll put I just clicked and dragged to put that there. And then our status is going to be our column label. So again, I'm just clicking and dragging down. And then ID and first name are going to be our rows. So we'll do ID first because it's what's listed first, and it wants last name underneath ID. So notice that green line underneath. When I let go, it fills in that information here. Task 24 wants us to go ahead and create a pivot chart based upon the table found on the employee records worksheet. So we'll go ahead and select our range. We'll click insert here at the top, and in the charts group we'll click pivot chart, drop down to select pivot chart. It's going to verify the range we just selected. We'll click OK. And then the first thing it wants us to do is, it tells us do not show the first and last name in the field report. But what it wants us to do is make the status section our legend. So we're just clicking and dragging down. Our office is going to be its access. And then the ID field is going to go on values. Now, if it does not say sum of ID here, you need to go ahead and click this to change that if it does not say that. And then we'll click next. Task 25 wants us to go ahead and modify this pivot table. So we'll put our cursor here to get the pivot table fields here. It tells us it does not want to see office in anything that we have. So we'll go ahead and uncheck that box, or you could have clicked and dragged it off. And then what it wants us to do is to make the status the first row, first and last name here, and then it wants the ID underneath that. Task 26 wants us to insert a slicer on our employee records table worksheet. So we'll click that tab here at the bottom. We'll go ahead and put our cursor here. And then what we want to do is go to the Analyze tab here at the top. We're going to, in the filter group, click Insert Slicer. It tells us that we want to insert it for Office, so we'll check the Office box and click OK. And then it wants us to change this name here to read Office as shown. And so over here with that selected, Slicer Tools options, we'll change this to change that to Office is shown. We'll click enter to set that text. Notice it went ahead and changed that for us. Now what it wants us to do is to only show Arizona. And I'm going to hold, once I select Arizona, I'm going to hold the control key down and select Utah, and still with it selected, I'm going to select Washington. That way it allows me to select those different names. We'll click next. Task 27 wants us to go ahead and create a macro. So what we want to do is go to the View tab here at the top. In the Macros group, we're going to click the Macros drop down and select Record Macro. Our macro name is going to be called Height, capital H. It doesn't tell us to change anything here, so we'll leave the defaults. We'll click OK. And unlike Word, it's not showing a change in my cursor, but we know it's recording because I have this stop button down here at the bottom. So right now, Excel is recording everything we're going to do here. And we're going to go ahead and click the Home tab here at the top. And in the Cells group, we're going to go ahead and click the Format drop-down for row height. We'll change that to 30. Click OK. And then it wants us to change our font type as well. So we'll put our cursor here in the size and type in 12 and click OK. And now what it wants us to do is select the range of A3 to G9. It wants us to run that macro. So with that range selected, we'll click the View tab here at the top. We'll go to our macros group and click View Macros, and we're going to go ahead and select Run. Task 28 wants us to go ahead and record a macro. So we're going to go to the View tab here at the top, Macros group, Macros drop down, and select Record Macro. The name of this is going to be called Formatting. And now what we want to do is go to the Home tab. And the first thing it wants us to record is to change the formatting from general to currency. So we'll go ahead and do that. And then what it wants us to do is to add a conditional formatting. So we'll select conditional formatting, and what it is it's a blue gradient data bar. So we're going to select data bar, gradient fill, blue data bar. And it's still recording our macro, so we want to make sure we stop that before we do anything else. We'll click View here at the top. Macros group, we'll click the Macros drop down and select Stop Recording. And then it tells us to apply this macro to the financial data. So this is our financial data, and we'll select the numbers here in this range because that's where it wants us to apply the formatting. And on the View tab, Macros group, we'll select View Macros, and then we're going to select Run for our formatting. Task 29 wants us to go ahead and create a button form control. We want to be on the Developer tab. If you do not have that, right-click here in the tabs, click Customize the ribbon. Make sure you check this box next to Developer and click OK. And then once on the Developer tab, we're in the Controls group. We'll click the Insert drop-down. And what we want is the button form control. If you're not sure, hover. And it tells us we can apply this button to any cell. So I'm just going to draw that form. And then we're going to set data bars. This is what it tells us to. We'll click OK. It wants us to go ahead and change the name here from button 1 to set data bars. And then what we want to do is click out of the button to set that text. And then it tells us to go ahead and run it. So we'll go ahead and run it and notice the change. Task 30 wants us to go ahead and edit this spin button here to have some formatting. So what we're going to do is actually just right click that, click Format Control. On the Control tab, we're going to change the minimum to 1, the maximum to 100, and we're going to change the incremental to 1, and we'll click OK.